Why scientists are using the word scary over the climate crisis. Back in the 1980s, when climate research began to really take off, scientists were desperate to retain their credibility as they unraveled the potentially dire consequences of the new phenomenon of global warming. Most journalists tiptoed round this topic because no one wanted to lose their reputation by scaremongering. But as the science steadily became overwhelming, researchers pushed their conclusions in the face of policymakers. More and more scientists are now admitting publicly that they are scared by the recent climate extremes, such as the floods in Pakistan and West Africa, the droughts and heat waves in Europe and East Africa. That is not because an increase in extremes was not predicted. It was always high on the list of concerns alongside longer-term issues such as sea level rise. It is the suddenness and ferocity of recent events that is alarming researchers, combined with the ill-defined threat of tipping points, by which aspects of heating would become unstoppable. Climate computer models have typically projected a fairly consistent but smooth rise in temperatures. But recently the climate seems to have gone haywire. The heat phenomenon in the Canadian town of Lytton, for instance, produced a dome of trapped heat that cranked up the temperature to 49.6 C. Wildfires raged and the town was razed. I broke the news to one of the Royal Society's leading members, Professor Sir Brian Hoskins, but at first he did not believe me. Then he said, "Oh, my God, that's really scary." The high temperature itself was shocking enough, but amazingly it topped the previous record by 5 degrees, when records are normally beaten by just a few tenths of a degree. Hoskins told me later, climate models have generally projected very smooth changes, whereas the real world is suffering rapid regional changes. The rise in globally average temperature is a useful metric of how far climate change has got, but it doesn't bring home the message of the likely local and regional impact. So, land warms more than oceans, higher latitudes warm more than low latitudes, especially in winter. The warming is non-uniform, which means weather changes. Air that is 6 C warmer can hold 50% more water and generally does. I have been surprised and alarmed at the record temperatures and floods we have seen in many places around the world, with only 1.1 C warming, globally. In July this year the UK's had its first 40 C day.
2 years previously, researchers said the chances of that happening this decade were 100 to 1. The small print of that day revealed a truly extraordinary high temperature at Bromham, Yorkshire, breaking the previous record by 6.5 C. Professor Hannah Cloak, from Reading University, said, "This sort of thing is really scary. It's just one statistic amongst an avalanche of extreme weather events that used to be known as natural disasters. But it is the threat of unstoppable long-term change that most worries Professor Dame Jane Francis, director of the British Antarctic Survey. She has witnessed temperatures in the Antarctic of 40 C above the seasonal norm, and 30 C above in the Arctic. Francis was most alarmed by a recent report warning that if the 1.5 C threshold were exceeded, seen by most scientists as almost inevitable, it could trigger multiple climate tipping points, abrupt, irreversible, and with dangerous impacts.